We want to check out a Bible passage or two. Be prepared, AP, to cry your little eyeballs out. Allahu Akbar over your food and the Bismillah over your food. Is that if you eat that food, are you in violation of the words of Paul in 1 Corinthians 8 and 10? So that's what we're going to check out now. So you could have all these other objections. If this is your objection, let's go ahead and read the passage. Concerning food sacrificed to idols. Now, about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols. We all know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. So here Paul's talking about, it's sacrifice an idol. What is an idol? We don't care. It's nothing. It's not. It's not something to be. You don't have to be concerned that this idol is actually this living thing. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven, on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. And since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. So keep in mind the reasoning here. Paul is saying, hey, if my sandwich, let's say my sandwich was sacrificed to an idol, should I care that my food is sacrificed to an idol? No, the idol is nothing. But he says, but there are people that this might bother. So he says, not everyone possesses this knowledge. In other words, not everyone possesses the knowledge that this idol is just a joke. Some people think of this as they're actually, being sacrificed to gods and so on. So verse 9, be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. So that's Paul's concern in this passage. You're not concerned about your food being sacrificed to an idol, but someone else might be. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you, with all your knowledge, eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall in sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. Now, as far as the historical context here, this is Paul's letter to the Corinthians. So Christians are a minority, a small minority in a pagan culture. Notice what he says here. Eating in verse 10, if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge, eating in an idol's temple. So he's talking about food that's actually sacrificed as part of ritual sacrifice in the temple of an idol, right? And so think about this. If you grow up in Corinth, I think they had the big temple of Aphrodite there and so on. So that's what it would have been. You go to the temple of Aphrodite for a meal or something like that. Suppose someone says, hey, come to the temple of Aphrodite for this meal. And you're like, okay, I don't believe in Aphrodite, so I don't really care if you sacrifice that food to Aphrodite. I don't believe in Aphrodite. I don't believe Aphrodite is an actual living thing. Doesn't bother me at all. But you have other, let's say, new Christians who are coming out of paganism, and they see you over there eating at the temple of Aphrodite. And they're thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? There's food sacrificed to Aphrodite. What's going on here? This guy's over here eating there. So what? But they still think of it as food sacrificed to gods. And so they think you're doing it. And, okay, if he's doing it, then I can do it and it's okay. But they still think of this not as something that's sacrificed to a lifeless hunk of rock or statue or something like that. They're thinking of this as something sacrificed to gods, and it affects them. Paul says you should be worried about that. So you're not actually concerned about the food or about the idol or about any of that. You're concerned about other people. That's what he thinks you should be concerned about. So that's one passage. We're going to look at one more. Look at part of chapter 10 is relevant as well. Let's read this little part of 1 Corinthians 10, and these are basically the main passages that have to deal with this issue. All right, idol feasts and the Lord's Supper. By the way, I do have to emphasize here, what in that other passage in 1 Corinthians 8, remember, he's clearly talking about something prepared as some sort of worship or sacrifice. He talks about being in the idol's temple and so on. And here it's in the context of the Lord's Supper. So this is specifically having to do with religious practices and so on. He says, therefore, my dear friends, flee from idolatry. I speak to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. Is not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks a participation? So he's talking about the Lord's Supper here. Is not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks a participation in the blood of Christ? And is not the bread that we break a participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one loaf, we who are many are one body, for we all share the one loaf. So we share the cup, we share a loaf of bread, and we are united. Consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? So as part, you can look at the Old Testament rituals. You do your sacrifice, and then a portion is given to you to eat from your sacrifice at the altar. Consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? Do I mean then that food sacrificed to an idol is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. But the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God, and I do not want you to be participants with demons. So here's different. Before he's saying, the idol is just nothing and so on, and he says, do I say that an idol is anything? No, not saying that. But he does. Then he goes on to say that these things are sacrificed to demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. Are we trying to arouse the Lord's jealousy? Are we stronger than he? So some people read this passage and they say, oh, okay, you can't participate in the Lord's table and be a participant with demons. And therefore, if you've got a chicken and it's sacrificed to Allah or something like that, then what's going on there? Again, keep in mind, he's talking about the Lord's Supper here. He's talking about the Lord's Supper here. So a meal that Christians would share, should you be including food that's sacrificed to demons? Is he talking about never, ever having food sacrificed to demons? Well, let's go ahead and keep reading, because he can't mean that, because he goes on to say he really doesn't care. As far as if the food is sacrificed to something, he doesn't care. It's not something that would affect a Christian. So the believer's freedom. But he goes back to saying that his issue is he's concerned with people. Paul is concerned with people and their consciences. He's not concerned with the idol or demons or anything else. I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So how this would work is you would sacrifice your animal to Aphrodite. Some of that would be part of the temple worship. Some of it would be sold in the meat market. Paul says if you're going and buying a steak, don't even ask. Don't even ask what this was sacrificed to. Why? The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Everything is the Lord's. It's all God's. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, so if some pagan, some polytheist who worships Aphrodite says, hey, you want to come over for a meal? If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. So don't bother asking. Don't bother asking, hey, was this sacrificed to Aphrodite? I really want to know. But if someone says to you, here's where he's concerned about other people. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. I am referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. For why is my freedom being judged by another's conscience? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So you thank God for the meal, but someone else raises an objection and says, hey, this food was sacrificed to Aphrodite. Why does Paul think that you should be concerned there? Well, if it's a Christian who says, hey, don't you know that this has been sacrificed to Aphrodite? This is obviously a Christian who thinks that this is actually participating in the worship of Aphrodite, in which case, don't eat it because it's going to be bothering that Christian. If it's an unbeliever, so a polytheist who says, hey, this is sacrificed to Aphrodite, that person is interpreting you eating it as somehow being involved in the worship of Aphrodite. So in other words, if the people around you are thinking that this has something to do with you worshiping Aphrodite or something like that, then don't do it. It's not that important. And then you have here at the end, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way, for I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many so that they may be saved. So if you eating a certain thing is going to cause a problem for people who are associating that with worship, then don't do it. And that would be the idea. But apart from that, Paul doesn't consider the idol to actually be anything that could harm you or that you're necessarily somehow worshiping if you eat something that was sacrificed to, again, let's say Aphrodite or something. So with all that said, should I care if someone slaughtered an animal and pronounced the name of Allah over it? Do you think that eating at a KFC in Canada that serves halal chicken is a violation of 1 Corinthians 8 and 10?